Ah!
One, two, three.
Welcome to the High Sierras, and welcome to Volume 2 of the Woodsmaster. In this volume, we're going to be talking about shelter techniques. Now, you're going to see some techniques in this volume that are meant only for survival situations. One of those in particular is meant only for survival situations. That's going to be the firebed. We're going to be showing you how to build a special kind of way of heating the earth and setting it up so that you could pull that heat back out of the earth during a cold night. But it's not something that you want to practice. It's something that you should know how to do in case of an emergency. The remainder of the tips in this tape are going to be dealing with other things. We're going to be talking about the environmental features of wherever it is that you are, and they're very general in nature for the most part. We're going to be talking about specific events that take place in the mountain ecology. We'll be talking about the motion of the air during the daytime and during the nighttime. We'll be talking about how cold air flows. We'll be talking about the proper places to set up a shelter. And we're going to be talking about fire making. Now, if you've already taken a look at Volume 1, you know a little bit about spark-based fire making. And that's really where, as I said in that volume, survival starts. Once you can start a fire with a spark, you can start one anywhere, and you could pretty much be assured that at least in cold weather you can survive. But fire carries with it a terrible cost, at least in terms of threat to the wilderness. It's probably the single most dangerous skill that you can have. And it's often one that's misused by people. I remember a story that came out in a local newspaper some years ago. Some mountain biker was riding around and somehow had gotten lost, and he didn't know where he was, and he wasn't very happy about being wherever it was he was, so he decided he'd start a signal fire to get some help. And he did that. This was in the Los Padres National Forest in Southern California. He started his fire. And the fire burned, and it was a heck of a signal fire. In fact, it was about 1,000 acres when it was finally put out. And you know who they found in the middle of the fire? The mountain biker. It didn't help his survival one little bit. And that's the kind of thing we need to watch out for. I'll be showing you how to build a fire properly, at least where to build a fire properly, and I'll be showing you a lot of other little tricks related to shelter. But you've got to take each of these things and consider them for the hazards that they represent, both to you and to nature. So with that said, in this tape we're going to be in two different locations in the Sierra. We're going to be in an area that's a little bit lower that has different shelter requirements, and up here where your shelter requirements are very specific. As we move through the information, you're going to find out that your basic shelter needs are going to remain the same no matter where you are. It's just going to be how you're going to construct that shelter that's going to change. Now, as we walk along, you may notice a dog or two wander in and out of the scene. Those are my dogs, and we let them come along on these trips. I hope you don't mind that. We certainly don't, and heck, we love them. So let's get started. We've got a lot to do. Let's stop and remember for just a minute why shelter is so important. Our bodies can only tolerate a very narrow band of temperatures, either hot or cold. And the shelters that we're going to be working with here are shelters that are designed or might be useful to a common recreational camper, to someone who would go up on a backpacking trip and for one reason or another might be stuck out. We're not talking about Arctic shelters here. We're just talking about the kind of shelter that's most likely to be used by the largest number of people. Now, we all know, or maybe we don't, cold air goes down into the bottom of a canyon, and that's where most recreational campers set up their camp, down low in the bottom of the valley. What we're going to be looking for is a shelter that's a little bit higher, something up in the rocks, up along the side of the mountain behind me. So let's take a look at it. Let's go up there and see if we can find ourselves a nice spot and get started on our shelters. Hi, Kumi. How you doing, buddy? Well, before we start looking for that shelter, I think it's important to start understanding how it is exactly that your body loses heat. Now, there's 5 heat loss mechanisms: conduction, convection, radiation, respiration, and perspiration. We need to explain each and every one of those things so you know exactly what you need to do to defeat heat loss through them. So let's go sit down somewhere and talk about it. You know, looking for a shelter is a lot of work, but let's talk about those heat loss mechanisms before we start complaining about how much work it is. I mentioned there's 5 of them: conduction, convection, radiation, respiration, and perspiration. Get out a pencil and get comfortable, because it's going to take me a couple of minutes to explain all this stuff. And my dogs are running around too, so if you see me looking at something, it's just them. Let's talk about conduction first. Whew, that's cold. What I'm experiencing right now is heat loss through the first of the 5 heat loss mechanisms: conduction. Conduction is where the heat passes from the warmer body to the colder body. The warmer body in this case is my fanny. The colder body is a snow-covered log, and that log is cold. Well, so is the earth. If you lay down on just plain old ground, like sand or dirt or anything like that, you're going to feel the same heat loss. It may not be as profound as what I'm feeling right here, but it'll get to you very quickly, because the heat will pass from you to the ground, and you can't heat up the earth. I've learned over the years that quite a few backpackers will go out and spend a couple of $100s on a beautiful sleeping bag. Very, very, very warm. Good to 10 below zero. Take it on a camping trip and freeze all night long. The temperature was only about 40 degrees. Why? It's because they laid that sleeping bag right down on the ground, and their body was losing heat through its conduction. Well, that's one of the ways we lose heat. So we've got to be sure that when we make a shelter, or we select a shelter, that there's plenty of protection from heat loss through conduction. The second one is convection. You can tell by the motion of the branches that we've got a little air movement here. And as you probably know, air movement is often called wind. And wind really pulls the heat away from you. You've all heard of the wind chill factor. And we've got a heck of a wind chill factor going on here right now, because it's cold and the air is moving. Now, up here in the mountains, we've got a wind blowing most of the time. You might be able to see that this stuff is kind of blowing off that direction, and that happens to be up canyon. The wind is going to be blowing up canyon during the daytime and down canyon at night. Up canyon as the air heats up and starts to rise, down canyon as it gets colder and starts to move down. And it can happen if you're stationary and the air is moving past you, or it can happen if you're on a bicycle or a motorcycle. The air is still, but you're moving. Either way, it pulls the heat away from you very, very rapidly. So your shelter needs to give you protection from heat loss through convection or the wind. Radiation. Radiation is heat loss into space. Right here where I'm standing, I can feel sunlight beaming up off of this snow. It's really hot where I'm standing. Seems odd to be standing in the middle of a snow field like this and feel warm, but that's the effect. Now at night, when there's no sun beaming off the snow, the only thing around here that's going to be warm is you. And you're going to be the source of radiation. And once again, you're going to be kicking radiation out. It's going to be going up into space where you'll be losing it. You see, we're the warm body again, and we kick heat right up into space. You ever notice how it feels a little bit warmer on a cloudy night? Or maybe you're outside on a cold night and it feels chilly, and then you step underneath a carport and it feels a little warmer. Well, if you took a temperature into that carport, you'd probably find out that the temperature is about the same. But outside, when you step out underneath that clear sky, the radiation from your body is shooting up into space. As a matter of fact, we lose somewhere between 60 and 80% of our body's heat production through our head and our neck. So one of the important things to do when you're looking for shelter is to, 1, wear a hat. I always carry mine with me. And 2, search for something that can go over your head to help reduce heat loss. This is my little hat here. You've seen it a few times before. I abuse that poor hat. Well, now we've had conduction, convection, radiation. The next one, respiration. Heat loss through respiration is another way we cool off. Every time we breathe in cool air, we breathe out warm air, and we lose just a little bit of heat. Now, I'm not telling you to stop breathing, because if you do that, that's counterproductive. I went out here into the forest and searched high and low and finally located a Ziploc bush. And I have it here. I just wanted to show you what heat loss through respiration looks like. Oop. You can see there that moisture on the inside is moisture that came from my lungs. This bag is also filled with warm air that came from my lungs. So if you're in a survival situation, what you need to do is be sure that you don't work too hard and increase your respiration rate. It'll dehydrate you and you'll cool off. Well, we know by the rule of threes that you've got to breathe. If you stop breathing, you're going to be dead in 3 minutes. So you've got to breathe. But what happens is this. It's a cold, cold day or cold night, and you breathe in cold air, and then you breathe out warm air. That means you're losing heat just through breathing. What can you do about it? Well, some people already know. You can put a muffler on over your face to help protect yourself that way. That way when you exhale, it heats up the fabric, and then when you inhale, the new air is heated just a little bit by passing through that warmer fabric. Conduction, convection, radiation, respiration, and the last one is perspiration. Actually, perspiration is 2 things. It's perspiration or wetness, either one. That water is cold. You know, it's really important in a survival situation that you avoid getting wet at all costs. It doesn't make any difference how you get wet. It could be through perspiration, immersion, snow, rain, whatever. Water conducts heat hundreds of times faster than dry air. So if you want to stay alive, stay dry. Now, sometimes people will find themselves in a survival situation simply because they slipped into a stream and they got wet, and then the wind starts to blow and they lose their heat and they drop into hypothermia and they die. Other times people find themselves in the situation because they get excited. Oh my God, I'm lost. Oh, what am I to do? And they start to run, and they waste their energy running, searching for something, and finally they stop, and their bodies are heaving and puffing, and they're respiring very rapidly, losing heat that way, but they're also sweating, so their clothing is wet. And so now suddenly that heat starts to flow out of them. Well, those are the heat loss mechanisms we need to protect ourselves from. We're going to search for a place that protects you from heat loss through to the ground. That's conduction. We're going to look for a place that has protection from the wind, convection. Conduction, convection. Radiation. We're going to look for something that's going to have a little overhead protection, maybe a tree or something like that, or a rock shelter. Conduction, convection, radiation. Respiration. We're not going to work too hard looking for this place. When we get where we're going, we're not going to be jumping around. Conduction, convection, radiation, respiration, perspiration. Are you getting hypnotized yet? Perspiration, well, we're not going to sweat it either, and we're not going to get wet. We're going to protect ourselves from rain, we're going to protect ourselves from snow, and I doubt that's going to happen, but we're not going to sweat. So we'll stay dry. If we can do that, we can survive. So now we need to start searching for that special place that gives us everything we need. Well, we got to walk again. Okay. You may wonder why I'm spending so much time worrying about shelter. And what it comes down to is priorities. And the way I've done it is I've set these priorities up in something I call the rule of threes. And it works like this. Normally you have about 3 minutes of survival without air. If you're underwater for 3 minutes, there's a good chance you're going to die. If you're out in the mountains and it gets cold out, wind is blowing, you're wet, you have about 3 hours of survival without shelter. You're in the desert or you're walking through the mountains and it's warm outside and you have no water. You have about 3 days without water. And you know what? It takes almost 3 weeks for you to die with no food. In fact, some people can last a lot longer than just 3 little weeks. There's another element that some people like to toss into this, and I'm not sure about it, but it works out like this. You have about 3 months of survival without love. And what that really means is some people really need companionship. They need to have people around them, people to talk with. And if they don't have that, they lose hope and they give up the ghost. But that's what you should be using, is the rule of threes. When you're out in a survival situation, you need to think about what you need first. You've got plenty of air, you're okay. Then you need shelter. If shelter's not a problem, then you need water. If you've got plenty of water, then let's go look for food. But you know what happens? People get stuck out in the wilderness, and they look around and they say, oh my God, what am I going to do now? Holy moly, I got to get something to eat. I'm going to go hunting. Huh. Long before they get an animal, they've died from exposure. They died that night. Keep your priorities straight. Follow the rule of threes. It'll get you through a lot of nasty situations. So, when you find yourself out in the mountains and you look around that first time searching for the ideal shelter, you're going to run into a phenomena that a lot of people do. They say, God, it's big out here. There's a lot of places. Where do I start looking? Well, there's some techniques that'll help to reduce the kind of search that you start off on. One, if you're in the northern hemisphere, which I assume you are, what you're going to be searching for is a slope that's exposed to the sunlight during the daytime. We call those south-facing slopes. In other words, they face south. In the northern hemisphere, for the most part, the sun will be to the south. It'll be rising in the east, setting in the west, but it'll be in the south. So any slope that faces to the south is going to be receiving more solar radiation during the daytime. So that helps to narrow the search. Look around you for a slope that faces to the south. The next thing that you do is search for an area that has a slightly different vegetation than other areas. South-facing slopes tend to be a little drier, a little rockier, and have a different type of vegetation than north-facing slopes. That's because there's less moisture in the soil, the plants that grow there are different, and a variety of other things. There tends to be a little bit more erosion, and so forth. This behind me is a south-facing slope, and it's a good example of it. Now it looks pretty barren, but there you are, looking around. You look up on the side of a mountain, you find a south-facing slope, you see a rocky area, it's kind of barren, and right up in there, there's some good shelters. Now these rocks here have been absorbing sunlight throughout the daytime. All night tonight, they're going to be re-radiating that heat, and that's going to keep you warm. Most people have had an experience with re-radiated heat, natural heat. If you ride a bicycle or a motorcycle, you probably run into it many times. It might be a summer evening, you're riding your bicycle and suddenly it feels very warm. And then you ride a little farther and it cools off quite a bit. And then maybe again it gets warm. If you look down at the ground, when you feel it's starting to get warm, you'll probably notice that you're driving over asphalt. It's dark in color. It's been absorbing sunlight throughout the day and re-radiating that heat at night. So it keeps it nice and warm. If you're riding in a cooler area, look down and you'll see concrete. Lighter color, doesn't absorb as much heat, doesn't have as much to give up at night. Well, these rocks tend to be pretty light in color, but they are rocks and they do absorb a lot of heat. So this area in here is a good place to search for a shelter. A lot of nice microclimates. It's good and warm. We're about 50 to 75 feet above the valley floor. We're out of the majority of the wind. So this is the kind of area you're searching for. So let's take a look around in these rocks and see if we can find the place we want to spend the night. Well, this little shelter here has got some of the idea. You see we've got a tree over the top. That'll protect us from heat loss through radiation. We've got rocks on either side of it. That'll protect us from the wind, the convection. And we've got some pine needles on the ground. And that'll protect us from heat loss through conduction. But there is a problem. It doesn't look very comfortable, and it's on a slope. So let's not pick this one here. Let's take a look, and maybe we could find something a little better than this. In fact, we better. This might look attractive to some people. You got a nice flat area here, sandy, looks comfortable. Got some rocks here. They're probably nice and warm from working throughout the daylight to absorb all that solar radiation. But again, there's a problem. That sand's going to cool off and you'll lose heat through conduction. We're on a ridge line right here, so the wind will be blowing back and forth all night long. That's not comfortable. And there's nothing over our heads. There's no protection from radiation. So as comfortable as it might look, let's keep looking. Caves like this one here are often pretty good shelters. One thing to watch out for is, well, it's the rattlesnake, particularly in areas like the one we're in here. They're sometimes a little bit tight, but you can often kick the debris out from the inside and layer the bottom with pine needles and make a fine little bed that'll protect you. The rocks themselves are going to be nice and warm from the heat they picked up during the daytime. So these can be real good, but I don't think I want to go through the trouble of excavating a cave. So I'm going to keep on looking. This is a little bit more like it. I know it doesn't look like much right now, but it has a rock to absorb the heat during the daytime, and it's a nice rock. I like that rock. I've got some pine needles on the ground here. I can move a few more in to give me more insulation on the bottom. And I've got some trees overhead, and those will help to reduce that heat loss through radiation. It's this kind of thing you're looking for. But sometimes you're going to find a shelter that's just about right, except for one little thing. This is also the middle of a drainage area for the top of the mountain here. It's not actually a stream, but if it started to rain pretty hard, you'd feel a little bit like Noah. So watch out for drainage areas. Sometimes the nicest sites are made because they're drainage areas. So let's keep on looking. We'll find something. Yeah, you know, when you're tired and you're looking for a place to rest your head, almost anything seems comfortable. Nice pine needles, it's padded. Yeah, I think I could sleep here. Except for one little problem. You never want to sleep with your head downhill. You see, when you sleep downhill like that, the blood rushes to your head and you turn into a giant bloody head. And that's not good. What you really want to do is sleep on flat ground. You know, you might think, gosh, I could sleep on that same slope with my feet downhill. Yeah, you could. And then you'd slide all night long. We had a student on a trip one time set up a tube tent on the ground on top of some pine needles on a slope just like this. Thought, oh, this is great, nice and comfortable. I think I'll just sleep here. Well, she went to sleep. I guess it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning when we heard this terrible scream. And we heard this thumping and bumping sound. Well, a lot of people got up and went running out to find out what made the noise, and there she was at the bottom of a canyon. That tube tent turned into a toboggan, the pine needles turned into snow, and she slid all the way to the bottom. You know, she thought somebody was kidnapping her. Nah, find a flat spot, it's worth doing a little extra walking. So we'll keep on checking. Well, this must be the right neighborhood. Now look at this. I've got myself a nice thick layer of pine needles here. A good looking tree with a branch over my head to help cut down on that radiation. Got some nice rocks. These are going to help make a nice microclimate in this area, and it's going to be all captured by the tree up above me. Well, let me think about this for a second. 1001. Okay, it's home. I'm here. I'm going to make this into my sleeping quarters. And it's just about time to get to work because I don't have a lot of time left before that sun goes down. I said that I didn't have too much time until the sun went down. But how do I know that other than just looking up there and seeing, well, the sun looks like it's about to go down. Here's a little trick that you might enjoy. It's sometimes called fist time. And all it requires is a fist or two. Here's how it works. A fist, when you hold it out in front of you about like this, bisects about 15 degrees of arc. Now that may sound a little strange or not too useful, but when you know that 15 goes into 360 24 times, then maybe you can make the connection that, golly, one fist equals about 1 hour of sun time, because that's about how long it takes for us to see the sun in the same position the next day, 24 hours. So what we do is this. We put our fist out at the horizon where we think the sun is going to go down, and that's 1 hour. Another fist on top of that, that's 2 hours. Another fist on top of that, and that's 3 hours, and so forth. Well, all you need to do is to make a count to the lower edge of the disk of the sun. And don't look directly at the sun. The number of fists to the lower edge of the disk of the sun is the number of hours till sunset where you're standing. And since you'll see 4 knuckles on each 1 hour, you can say that this is 15 minutes, 30, 45, and an hour. So in that way, each finger is worth 15 minutes on a 1 hour fist. Now your hand may be a little bit different. Your arms may be a little shorter, your fist may be a little larger, or maybe you've got tiny little hands and long arms. Don't know. So what you've got to do is accurize your fist. Now, there's a lot of ways to do that. You could whittle a big fist down, or you can swell a big fist up, but the best way to do it is just to actually find out how many minutes one of these fists is worth. The way I recommend it is simple. Find the horizon, wherever you happen to be, and put your fist out at the horizon, with the horizon at the bottom of your fist. And count the number of fists it takes until your hand is pointing straight up in the air. If it takes 6, guess what? You've got a 15 degree fist. If it takes more than that, you could work out how many degrees it's worth, and from that you could tell how many minutes a fist will be worth to you when you hold it out like that. But remember, it's really important. Don't look directly at the sun. Okay, the spot here that I've chosen to spend the night in is this right here up against the rock. I'll have that rock close to me, and I'll flatten this area out just on this side. Now since this slope tilts a little bit this way, in towards you, and from up here, that direction, I'm going to need to do something to stabilize this, to keep it from sliding down the hill naturally. So what I'll do is I'll put some kind of a barrier, maybe a few logs or rocks or something along those lines, right in this area here, along this line. And that'll keep these pine needles from shifting down. Then I'm going to make up a nice thick layer of pine needles, and of course I'll remove my little friends here, and that should make a nice comfortable bed. So I'm going to get to work at it, and I'll show you in just a little bit what it looks like. That's all you need. You don't have to build a wall. All you need is some sort of a little barrier to keep your mattress from sliding down the mountain. And this is good enough because your weight's going to be holding it down. It just has a tendency to settle out, that's all. So what I've got here is plenty for tonight. So let's see if this thing works. Well, after you finish making your bed, it's important to test rest it. And that means that you ought to lay down on that guy for, well, a few minutes, 15, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever you think you can afford, because you're going to be sleeping in it for 8, 9, 10 hours. And you want to be sure it's just right. One of the things you need to remember to bring with you when you go on your hikes, your excursions into the mountains, is of course your hat. But in addition to that, no matter when you're going up on a, well, if it's a day hike or a backpacking trip or anything that you might be taking, be sure you bring along some trash bags. These are real lifesavers. I generally put about 4 of these in my bag here, and the kind I get are heavy-duty trash bags. You can get lawn bags, those will work just fine. But whatever you use, a trash bag could save your life. Let me show you some of the different ways you can put a trash bag to use. There it is there. One, it can be a blanket. That's kind of a nice thing. Another thing you can use it for is if it starts to rain or the wind begins to blow. And you know, I don't understand why they don't say open here. Let's try it on the other end. Wind begins to blow and you start to chill. Now you can open that thing up and take a look at this. Woo! You've got a waterproof rain covering. Now, if you remember your priorities, your rule of threes, you're going to know that one of the priorities, the very first one, is you can only survive for about 3 minutes without air. So we can't let this continue. What we'll do here is we'll give ourselves a little breathing room. Something like that. Ah, that's much better. Now you can see I've got my upper body protected from wind and rain, and if I put my hat on, I've got that protected as well. But the wind can't get to me in here, and I've created something like a little vapor barrier. I know this is the height of fashion in vinyl land, but up here, this could be the difference between life and death. So bring your trash bags with you. I think I ought to show you a few more things that you can use a trash bag for. Well, it looks like it's about ready. What I've done is I've partially filled 2 of the trash bags with pine needles. You can see them both here. What I'm going to do is use those as, well, something like insulated blankets. I'll crawl up underneath these things, lay them on top. Now, before I do that, I'm going to take care of a couple of other items first. A lot of people complain about having cold feet at night when they go to bed. That's because their head is uncovered. If you've got cold feet, cover your head. It's an old saying. One of the ways to keep your feet fairly warm, though, is simple. Before you go to bed, loosen your boots. In other words, unlace those things until your feet are just flopping around inside. That gives you a lot of dead air space, and the dead air space is what insulates your feet. Another thing to do is tighten up your pants at the bottom. In other words, tie a piece of cord around the bottom or tuck them into your socks. That helps to stop something called pumping. As you move around, you tend to pump the warm air your body creates out down through your pant legs or out through your sleeves or other places in your body. So you want to close those off as much as possible and keep pumping to a minimum. So loosen up your shoes as much as you can. Tighten up your pants, your sleeves, your collar. Put on a hat or a headband or both. Crawl underneath these pine needle sleeping bag things on top of your bed and go to sleep. You'll be fine. Now don't worry about dying in your sleep of hypothermia. Some people say never go to sleep at night if you're cold. Well, fact of the matter is, if you're just chilly and you crawl into bed and you fall asleep, you're probably going to have a good night's sleep. If you wake up shaking, then you might be going into hypothermia. You won't just drop into exposure death for no reason at all. You'll wake up first, and then you'll die. Is that comforting? Anyway, I think I'm going to try this all out, and we'll see how it works. Well, this is pretty much what you end up with. I've got a nice layer of insulation underneath me. I've got a insulated blanket above me here, filled with pine needles. I'm sitting alongside or laying alongside a big rock that's been absorbing sunlight during the daytime, and it'll be kicking its heat back out all night. I'm underneath a big tree that keeps the radiation to a minimum. Because I'm on the pine needles, I'm two things. I'm comfortable and I'm warm. As a matter of fact, I'm really comfortable and I'm very warm. I also tossed one of my extra trash bags onto my feet there. That helps to keep the wind from blowing around there and makes them feel just a little bit more snug. So with this whole combination, I've created for myself a nice comfortable bed. And this is with 3 trash bags, and I still have an extra here if I start to get cold on the top tonight. I didn't want to bring my covers up because I wouldn't be able to talk to you. A pine needle insulation layer is going to be about that deep. There's something else though you should know about this. If you don't have the trash bags, that's okay too. The bed I'm laying on is probably about 1.5 feet deep in pine needles. I could make a depression in the middle of that thing about a foot or so deep, so I'd still be on top of 6 inches of pine needles. And then I could take more pine needles and lay them directly on top of my body. Instead of using the trash bags, they just lay there. And I'd be protected just as I am now. Perhaps not as well, maybe there'd be a little bit more wind flow, but it'd be nice and cozy. And I'd be able to sleep in there well through the night. So try this thing out. It's an interesting experience. Well, this bed is ready for me. I'm not quite ready for it. I've got some things to do today. I'm going to go down to a sandy area I see down below and build myself a nice little reflector fire. Something that's going to heat me up while the evening cools off a bit. See, a reflector fire wouldn't be safe where I am here. There's lots of pine needles around and pieces of wood. And if I built a fire in here, I'd have a forest fire in no time at all. So I'm going to find a safe place to build that little fire. While I'm there, I'm going to take advantage of heat gain mechanisms. They're exactly the same things as we use to lose heat. Conduction, convection, radiation, respiration, perspiration. Except I'm going to be sitting near a fire and gaining heat. I'll be drinking something nice and warm, gaining heat. I'll be breathing warm air, gaining heat, and like that. For my tea, I've decided on some of this stuff here. It grows wild all around here in the Sierra. It's called ephedra. It's also called joint tea, squaw tea, fir tea. It's got some other names as well. But you just break off a little bundle of it, toss it in some boiling water, wait about 10-15 minutes, drink it down. Warms you up. It's got a mild, well, wake me up effect as well. Not as strong as coffee, but it's good stuff, has a great flavor. Well, I'm thirsty, so I'm going to head on down and get that fire started. I've made these special little assemblies here. They're kind of crude, but I think I'll get the idea across. What you have here is a thermometer, a compass, and a little clock. And there's 2 of these devices. They're both identical. And you can see that the 2 thermometers register roughly the same temperature, actually pretty close. Don't pay any attention to those compasses. They don't know where we are, and heck, we do. We don't care. We're right here. And the clock, good enough. We don't care about time because we're in the wilderness. But anyway, we've got these 3 guys together here. Now let me show you what I've done to them. Here it is. I've taken both of these and put them on little poles. That's so I could take this pole, put it in the ground, and that will hold the thermometer above the ground. When it's above the ground like that, it'll be able to allow the wind, the air to blow past it like so, and cool it off to air temperature. If I was to lay this thermometer directly on the earth, all it would do is tell me what the earth temperature was. So we've got them on these little poles. And what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to place this pole down here in the bottom of a canyon, where the coldest air is going to be. And I'll take this other pole here, and I'll place it up in our shelter area. And then sometime tonight we're going to go down and take a look. And we want to see what the temperature difference is between down at the bottom of the canyon and up where we're going to have our shelter. Are you ready? Okay, let's put this one right here. There we go. Now that we've got this one placed down by the stream, we'll take the other one and put it up in camp. But you may be wondering, why is this guy doing that? Well, let me tell you. You see, cold air goes down. You all know that. You get up in the morning and maybe you go in to get a fresh glass of milk out of the refrigerator and you feel like cold air come puddling out of that refrigerator and hit you on the feet. Well, cold air goes down. It does the same thing in nature. If you want to stay out of cold air, what you don't want to be is down. You don't want to be at the bottom of a canyon. What you're going to probably see tonight is that the air down here will be something like 10 or 12 degrees colder than the air up where we're going to be. Now, this movement of air coming down into the canyon like that has a name, and we all know the name. It's called wind. You see, every day the wind blows two different directions. During the daytime, it blows up the canyon. As the air heats up and starts to rise, it rises right up the canyon and goes up into the high meadows. And then at night, it starts to cool down. And you'll find that as it gets colder, it gets heavier and denser, and it's going to start flowing back down the canyon. And that's wind. Wind is another thing we need to avoid in a shelter. So if we want to avoid cold air and wind, we stay out of places like this. Now, I'm sure most people wouldn't be camping on a soggy stream bed, but the idea is that anywhere within a few feet of this elevation is going to be quite cold. In fact, it's going to be quite cold for a distance of maybe 40 to 50 feet of elevation above this spot. And that's where we're going to be, 40 to 50 feet of elevation above the valley floor. So we'll be starting this fire just as you saw in Volume 1. What I have here is a little bit of steel wool sitting in a bird's nest made out of juniper bark. We'll strike that steel wool, get that burning. The juniper bark will light up. And after it's burning, we'll take some of this pine needle here, this nice dry pine needles, and we'll drop that on top of the fire. As soon as that ignites, we'll toss on some of these small sticks. They'll light easily. And on top of that, some larger sticks, and after that, larger sticks still. But that should give us a good-sized blaze ready to accept some real firewood. One of the problems a lot of people have with fires is they'll get something burning and toss a log right on top of it. Naturally, it's going to go out. It takes some heat to get the bigger wood going. So we'll start with steel wool. This here is a reflector fire. Now, a lot of people have heard of reflector fires before, and sometimes they think that what it is a fire that you build up against a great big old rock and let that fire burn, and the rock reflects the heat back at you and keeps you warm all night. Well, there's a couple problems with that kind of a reflector fire. One, it doesn't really keep you that warm because there's cold air behind you moving around, and the front side is nice and warm, the back side is nice and cold, so that's not too comfortable. And another problem, when you build a fire like that, it scars the rock. It leaves burnt marks all over the rock. And that's not good either. It's leaving a monument to yourself, and you don't need to do that. If you're going to be cold and scarring the wilderness, sounds like a bad plan. This is a better plan. What I have here is a rock fire, a little ring that I've made up, and behind me I've got a boulder. And that boulder picks up the heat that's coming off of this fire and reflects it back at me. And at the same time, that boulder has been absorbing heat throughout the daytime, and it's re-radiating that heat at night. So I'm trapped between two heat sources here. I've got the one behind me that shelters me from the wind and kicks some heat into this area, and the one in front that keeps me nice and toasty. So I don't feel uncomfortable in any way. Another thing about this fire here, when this started out, I walked into the area and there was a little sandy area, and a couple of big rocks were sticking down into the earth. Well, I rolled them apart, and when I did, it revealed a little hole where those rocks used to be. So I left the rocks just as they were, with the dirty side facing in towards the hole, put a couple other rocks, dirty side in towards the center of the fire, and built my fire there. Now when I'm done with this fire, all I need to do is make sure the fire is out, push the rocks back into the holes they came from, and the dirty side, and now the burnt side, will be facing down where all the nice microorganisms are to clean it up, and the outside of the rocks will look just like they ever did, and the remaining rocks will go back into the holes they came from. What I'm really saying to you here is, when I'm done with these rocks, they're going back to their homes, and the same side that was facing the earth will be facing the earth then, and there won't be any burnt marks. You won't be able to tell that I've been here, and that's an important point. Another thing is this: sometimes people build pretty big fires. There's an old Indian saying, "I build a fire to warm myself, and you build a fire to warm the sky." Well, build a fire to warm yourself. It takes a lot less wood, it's easier to build, it's easy to manage, and another thing, it keeps the sparks down. You've seen a few sparks jump off of this, and when you catch one of those sparks, you can just toss it right back into the fire. Be careful, because when those sparks get loose, they can start a fire somewhere else. This is the kind of fire you should be building, a small reflector fire, something you can control. Try it out, it'll work for you. Well, this one up here near my camp looks like it's about 55 degrees, and it's only 10 o'clock. Now it's really going to get cold about 4 o'clock in the morning, and it's at 55 here. We could expect probably another 10 or maybe even 15 degrees temperature drop. Let's go downstairs and see what the other one looks like. Well, now look at this thermometer. This one down at the bottom of the canyon says it's only 40 degrees here. The one up above said about 55. So that means that there's a 15-degree temperature difference just by going 50 feet down into the canyon. That's an important difference. That could make the difference between life and death. So remember that. Cold air goes down, and it's really cold at the bottom of a canyon. As you've seen, the temperature difference between the bottom of the canyon and up on the side of the canyon was about 15 degrees at the lower camp. But up here in the High Sierra, the temperature difference can be as much as 30 degrees from down in the bottom and partway up the side of a hill. Whoa! Whew. Well, good morning. Had quite a night last night. Found a few things that we turned into tools, and got some ideas, some stuff I'd like to show you that came up. So let's take a look at it. Last night when I went to bed, I got tired of listening to those trash bags rattling on top of me. So what I did is I just dumped all those pine needles right on top of myself. Now I've already mentioned that you can just make a trench like this, get down into the trench, and then pull the pine needles over on top of you, like so. And that'll give you a nice covering to keep you good and warm throughout the night. It's a little more sticky, but that's okay because you're warm. And it was a pretty chilly night last night. And I slept very, very well, actually. Last night when I went down to check the temperatures, I found a couple of beer cans. Here's one of them here. What I did with that beer can was I took my little pocket knife, and as you can see, I sliced it in an H pattern, like so. So you can fold those two flaps open just like that. Then I fill the bottom with sand. Then I'll take my little candle, stick it right in the middle, and I can hang it just like so. It gives me a candle lantern. Now if the wind starts to blow during the night, these act like wings and tend to turn it away from the wind. So it protects that little candle. But it's kind of nice because it gave me some light up here when I got away from my reflector fire and made it seem a lot more homey. This is a Pink Lady candle. I usually toss 2 of these into my little purse here and carry those with me whenever I go out into the mountains. What I do is I cut them in half. Now I've learned that if you just light a Pink Lady candle, it'll burn down in a hurry. The thing will just melt and a lot of the wax will be wasted. This here is the metal part of a 12-gauge shotgun shell that I found up in the mountains. And what I did is I took a 12-gauge shotgun shell, and remember this has been fired. Never do this with a live cartridge. I put the shell into the fire and burned it for a while, and that took all the plastic off of it. Then I took my Swiss Army knife and popped out the primer. That's the little shiny part that's right on the end of the metal casing. Now that fits right over the top of my Pink Lady candle. Now when I light that little wick right in there, the wax will pool on the top of the shell and it'll continue to burn, but it doesn't run down the sides of the candle. That makes these candles burn maybe 3 or 4 times as long as they would if I didn't have the metal cap on it. So try that out. All you got to do is make one of these one time and you can carry it with you. Here's a little trick that's known as the rule of thumb, and it involves this portion of your thumb, just the thumbnail. Now here's what you do. If you hold your arm out straight in front of you about like that, a 6-foot tall person will appear to be about as tall as your thumbnail when they're 100 yards away. That's nice for estimating the distance to a 6-foot tall person. But what about other things? Well, one thing we know is, if you hold your hand out like this, a lodgepole pine tree, an average lodgepole pine tree, will be about a mile away. And there's a lot of things that you can use it for. You might discover that at 50 yards, a deer will be half as tall as your thumbnail, or just about anything that you'd like to estimate the distance to. All you need to do is be 100 yards from something one time and know the height of it, and then you can measure it against your thumb. But it's called the rule of thumb, and eventually you'll find that you'll develop sort of an encyclopedia of heights for your thumbnail, and you could say, this is so far and that's this far and that thing over there is a little farther than that. Try it out, get used to it, and you'll enjoy it. You know, this water used to be clean enough to drink. It was really nice. You could dip a cup in there and take some, and it was wonderful. Just wonderful clear water. But it's terribly polluted now. And it's that way all over the United States. There's just stuff in the water. So you've got to filter everything. Not only that, but everywhere you go now, wherever you look, you find trash. Stuff like this can I've got here and a piece of wire. But that part isn't really so bad. I mean, it's bad that it's up here, but it's not bad from a survival standpoint. One of the things I learned early on is that a lot of this stuff is reusable. And I don't mean taking it back to the city for reuse, I mean right up here. This can, for instance, gives me an excellent little pot that I could cook in. I can also dig with it, and I could do a lot of other things with the metal on it. The piece of wire is going to end up being something that I can use to hold the can with. So I've got a nice use for that. Later on in another volume of the Woodsmaster, you're going to see how to make arrowheads out of flint and steel, or with flint and using a piece of steel, or with a piece of obsidian or other hard rocks. You can also use pieces of glass for arrowheads or knives or spear points or whatever other tool you want to make. The point I'm making is this: whenever you go to the mountains and you see trash, pick it up. Pick it up on the way in, and that way you'll have it available in case you need it. And more importantly, when you're leaving the wilderness, you're heading back to civilization, pick up a little bit more trash, stick it in your pack. It's not that heavy. And if everybody did that, this place would be a lot cleaner. I don't know that it would do very much for this water, but it sure would make the ground look a lot cleaner. Thank you very much. You know, in Volume 1 I talked a little bit about the Swiss Army knife and some of the uses you could put it to, and I've had a lot of questions over the years about what I think is important in a little pocket survival knife, and gosh, I think I'd like to show you a little bit more about that. Well, as you already know, you can take a little knife like this and cut a fairly substantial stick and just snap it off like so. We showed you that in Volume 1. We also showed you that the knife has in it a little saw blade that makes cutting large sticks fairly easy. It just saws away. Well, when you're holding it like this, it's not quite as easy, but I guess you get the idea that it'll saw right into a piece of wood, and you could do a lot of construction with a nice long saw blade like this. The knife also has a variety of other tools on it. It's got a screwdriver, bottle opener, and a thing they sometimes call a wire bender. I've never really used it for bending wire. This one has a little gut hook on it in case you want to clean an animal like a bird or something like that. It also has, you know, for those people who find they want to enjoy the wilderness in a special way. Obviously mine is not used as much in that way as it could be, but we've got a little corkscrew. This makes it a real nice knife for traveling. You know, you get into those foreign countries and you decide you don't want to drink the water, try the wine. It also has, located on the back of the knife, a thing called an awl. And this is used for drilling little holes. You're going to see this in operation in a little while. And right in the middle of the hole, right in the middle of the awl, it's got a little tiny hole. And that hole can be used to hold a piece of thread, so you can use the awl as a kind of fat needle. But you can sew with the thing. So the knife itself has quite a few features. And like most Swiss Army knives, it's got the little tweezers for removing whatever needs to be tweezed, and a toothpick hidden over on the other side for picking your teeth after those amazing survival meals you're going to be eating. So that's the basic Swiss Army knife that I carry around. And this model here, although I don't know the name of it, is a lot longer than most of them. This used to be called the Explorer, but there may be something else that it's called now. And I've seen these things for sale for quite some time. But that's not all there is to this little puppy. What we've got here is this. This little stick is a sharpening steel. I can use this to keep a good edge on that blade. Just by working the blade back and forth on it, I can keep it nice and sharp. And they make a lot of different kinds of sharpening steels. The next item on here is called a military P38 can opener. You've probably seen these in surplus stores. But this is a real handy little tool. You can use it for opening tin cans. Now, I mentioned that we sometimes find trash out here, and when we find trash out here, you may need to leave a take off the bottom of a can or remove some part of it. The P38 can opener is ideal for that. And if you've got canned food you find in a stash someplace, you can open it up and slurp it down. And finally, last but not least, is our metal match, the Boy Scout metal match, with which we can start a fire. So in this little package here, which I can put in my pocket, I've got a fire starter, a can opener, a knife sharpener, and all the tools that are on the knife. It's a handy little thing, easy to carry, does a lot of work, and I'll tell you this is the kind of thing you need to keep with you whenever you go to the mountains. Up here in the high Sierras at almost 10,000 feet, we have mostly lodgepole pine. And the pine needles on the lodgepole are kind of short. They don't make a very good bed. But down at the lower elevation, the trees there are different. And they have long pine needles, and they make an excellent pine needle bed that's good and warm. At first glance, this might not look like much, but in fact it could save your life. What you see here is a hollow tree trunk. And it's got a big hole right down the middle. Let me show you how deep it is. It's plenty big enough for me. I could crawl down in there and make myself a comfortable little nest. And you can see that the stuff on the outside here is pretty soft. You could pulverize it easily. And that's exactly what would happen. You find a thing like this, you pulverize the parts that you can, you make a nest down inside, and you're protected. You're protected by conduction, or from conduction, because you're laying on top of these pulverized pieces of wood that give you good insulation. You're protected from convection, because the wind can't get through the solid outer body of the tree. You're protected from radiation, because you can't radiate out into space. You're enclosed in a tree. So it's a good shelter. It's easy to make, one you could pop together in a hurry. There's just one little problem with this one. It's not a big deal, but it's something that I look at. You see, while this could save your life, it's not comfortable. It's at an angle downhill, so you'd end up in a little ball down at the bottom. What I prefer to find is one that's nice and flat, but gives me the same kind of features. It's not just survival sometimes, it's survival with style. This is a nice flat tree. It's a little bit more like what we were looking for. It also happens to be hollow. How do I know that? Well, somebody put a door on this one, and there it is there. The whole inside of this thing is made out of real soft material. So what I'm going to do is take my walking stick, start pulverizing this stuff, and let's see what we end up with. Well, as you can see, it makes a comfortable little shelter. Didn't take long to construct it all, and it gives me good protection. And when I'm ready to use it, all I need to do is reach down there, grab that big chunk of wood, put it back in place to fill up this hole, and go to sleep. And all that time I'll be protected by a 2-inch thick layer of pine. This is called a flip over stick trick. Now you may have noticed a great big old stick over there on the side of the screen. That's about as tall as the tree that you could see beside it. If you flip that over, you'll notice that I'm standing just about where it ends. That means that my position here is about as far from the base of the tree as the top of the tree is from its own base. If I was to measure the distance from where I'm standing to the base of that tree, I'll know how high that tree is. And that's the flip over stick trick. So let me walk over to it and let's find out how high it is, and then I'll tell you why you want to know. Well, it's 10 paces exactly, right to the base of this tree. That means this tree is about 50 feet tall. Now let me tell you how I came to that number. As you saw, I paced off the distance from where I was standing to the base of the tree and then announced that it was 50 feet. Well, how did I know that? Well, I know it because I know the distance of my pace. Just like the Roman foot soldier knew the distance of his pace. You see, the word mile that we use is actually mille, meaning 1,000. And that means that a mile is based on 1,000 Roman foot soldiers' paces. So next time you're driving, keep that in mind. Now my step is not quite as large as a Roman foot soldier's, but it gets me there. And let me tell you what a pace is exactly. A pace starts where your right foot is anchored. My right foot is anchored right here. The back of the heel is where it starts. I take a step, and then I lift my foot and drop it again. From the point my right heel left the ground until it encounters the ground again is one pace. So you should measure your pace and find out what the distance is from those 2 points. And then you'll be able to measure the height of trees and the distance across streams and a lot of other things. Why is it important that we know the height of that tree? Well, for this reason. You see, we already know that we need to be 50 to 75 feet above the valley floor in order to be out of the cold air movement. And as it turns out, that tree was almost exactly 50 feet tall. All we need to do is measure the height of a tree and then climb to a point on the hillside that's higher than the tree we measured, as long as that tree, of course, is 50 feet or more. But first of all, what is a firebed? Well, a firebed's nothing more than a hole that you've dug in the ground, and you build a fire in that hole. After a while, you cover that hole over with dirt, and you lay down on it. The heat's going to start coming up where that fire used to be, and it'll keep you warm all night long. In fact, the Indians that lived up in these mountains here, the Tubatlabal, High Plains Shoshone, used this technique almost exclusively in the winter. It's a wonderful way to stay warm, even on the coldest nights. Now, it relies on a thing that I call the 2-for-8 rule. This is the easiest way I know to remember the critical numbers. It's a 2-hour fire with 4 inches of dirt on top in an 8-inch deep hole. If you can remember that much, the 2-for-8 rule, you'll be able to build a successful firebed. Now you might say, gee, he didn't tell me how wide or how long it'll be. That's up to you. It doesn't make any difference. I generally make mine about 1 foot wide and about 6 feet long. But some people will make them a little bit narrower, a lot wider, or shorter. It's up to you. How much of a hole do you want to dig, and how much wood do you want to gather? Now, the site I've selected here for this firebed, I've selected for a number of reasons. And those reasons are boulders. We've got one here, here, and another one over there. These boulders have been absorbing solar radiation from the sun all day long, and now they're kicking that heat back out just to keep me warm right where I am. But I'm going to add some more heat to them. I'm going to build that firebed right here in the dirt, and then after that thing is burned for a while, these rocks will be even warmer. When the firebed's covered over, all of these rocks are going to give up their heat to heat this entire area, and I'll be laying on a nice warm spot. So let's get started on this thing. Here's a little caution. You notice that the dirt I'm digging in here is kind of wet. Wet ground means that when you build a firebed, it's going to be kicking off some steam throughout the night. That means that you ought to try to lay some kind of a barrier between you and the bed itself. Otherwise, you're going to be getting steamed all night long, and that'll give you steamed buns. For this demonstration, we're going to build this firebed about 4 feet long, as you see here, and it's about 8 inches deep. That's the depth of one of these coffee cans here. So that's about all the deeper you need to dig it. About this big, about 4 feet long. After you've finished digging the hole, go ahead and put a few small stones down in the bottom. Now the purpose of these stones isn't to hold heat. The purpose is to allow air to get up underneath the fire so it'll burn really hot and heat up this ground completely. And one more thing, be really careful. Don't go down to the stream and pick rocks up out of the water. Those are called stream stones, and they're filled with moisture. And if you were to put them in a firebed like this and heat them up the way these are going to get hot, they can explode. So be very careful. The rocks you get should come from the surface of the ground. Okay, now that's enough stones, but you'll notice that the tops of these stones are all roughly the same level. What you don't want to have is one stone sticking way up into it, because there'd be a lot of heat on that, and after you've covered it over, that little hot spot could give you a nasty burn. You notice I've piled up this wet dirt right around the outside of the fire bed. When this is burning, that dirt is going to start to dry out, and that'll drive some of the steam up out of it, so it won't affect you quite so much at night. Another thing that I've done with this fire bed is I've located it some distance from the rock on the end, and the one behind me and the one on the other end as well. This is so when the fire is burning, the flames and the smoke won't scar the rocks on either end or over here. Another thing that'll happen is this: when I'm done using this, all I have to do is kick the dirt around a little bit and there'll be no sign that I've been here sleeping. For tinder, I'm going to use the tips of a pine needle branch. These are the little dead tips that you'll find sticking out of just about any pine tree. They're usually dry because they're off the ground. We're going to use a technique from volume 1 to get it started, which will be fire starting tool and stainless steel. Once you get the fire started, be sure you burn the fire clear down the length of the pit. That way the entire pit will get nice and hot, and you won't have a single hot spot that's going to burn you during the night. Another thing is, try to keep it burning at about this level for an hour or so, and then let it die down to smaller flames for another hour. After it's gone down to coals, then you can cover it over with the dirt. This is about how the fire should look after it's been burning for 2 hours. When it burns down to coals, you could break the coals up and spread them evenly over the length of the trench. But when it's finished burning, you'll notice that the distance from the top of the coals here to the top of the trench is about 4 inches, and that's exactly what you want. So what do you do now? Well, you kill your old friend. You cover it up with dirt. Once you've finished covering up your fire bed, be sure that you compress that dirt. Use your feet to press it down as best you can. And then go through it and look for any kind of artifacts that might be in there, artifacts like rocks or pine cones and things like that. Another thing you could do if you'd like to is build another small fire off to the side to kind of give you some light while you're completing this, especially if it's in the dark. And here's a little tip for you. The distance between my little finger and my thumb is approximately the same as the size of the small of my back. So if you do this, run your hands in a straight line just like that where you think the small of your back is going to be, you can see that I've made 2 lines. And from those lines I can scoop out some little depressions like that. Those little depressions are going to be where my back and my fanny are going to go. And that'll give me a little bit more support, and it'll make the bed a lot more comfortable. Be sure you don't go too deep. If you do, you're going to get down close to those coals and it's get very hot. Another thing is it'll stretch you out just a little bit too much, and it won't be very comfortable after a couple hours. Well, there you have it. That's the basics of the fire bed. In about an hour or so, this thing is going to be good and hot. If you find that your fire bed gets hot after about 30 minutes, it's going to be too hot for you to sleep on. Toss on some more dirt. If it's an hour and a half before you feel any heat, it might be a little bit cool, but I'll tell you this, it'll still be warmer than the dirt outside. Well, be careful with your fire bed building. As you can see, survival shelters are a pretty straightforward proposition. There's a few basic things that you need to know, and you know them now. You know what the priorities are. You know what the heat loss mechanisms are. You know the wind blows down the canyon, and you know about heat loss through radiation and so forth. And you've also seen a few types of shelters that we've constructed. You saw the pine needle bed, the firebed, the reflector fire, a log shelter, and things like that. And those are all really neat things to know. And there's hundreds and hundreds of more ways to make shelters. But there's something that I need to pass along to you. In fact, a couple of things. The first of those is this. Just because you know how to make a survival shelter doesn't mean you should go out and just do it. Don't leave your goods at home. Don't leave your tent at home and your sleeping bag and so forth just to try a survival shelter to see if it works. What if you do it wrong? It might be the last time you go camping. If you want to try these techniques out, bring along your equipment. Make your survival shelter and then stay in it. If you find out that it's not working well for you, heck, get up, crawl into your tent and sleeping bag and spend the rest of the night. There are a few other issues that I'd like to bring up. One of those is be careful with fire. I always have to say that. Be very, very careful with fire, especially things like the firebed and the reflector fire. The idea behind those is that you'll be sleeping near them. And when you're asleep, you're not really in control of your fire. So be very careful when you use those techniques, and use them kind of as a last resort. Another thing is, it's kind of like a story. You see, one day I was walking along up in the mountains in the High Sierra, and I brought up a group of students from a university I was working at. And these students were scattered all around the mountainside. Well, as I walked along, I was walking right alongside a stream, I met one of the students. This fellow was breaking up logs. And you know, the air temperature was about 40 degrees, but he didn't even have a shirt on. He was sweating. He was working that hard. Finally, he broke enough logs and he picked these things up in his arms and he started to carry them uphill. Well, I was chatting with him as we walked up the hill, and he was sweating and breathing hard as we staggered into his camp. And he had a nice campsite. It was beautiful. Rocks all around, nice microclimate, protected from the wind. They had a pine needle bed and things like that. But there was no one else in the camp, and I knew that there were other people that were supposed to be camping with him. So I said, gee, where are your friends? He said, well, Bob's off hunting. He says, hunting, really? And what about the girls? Where are they? He says, well, I don't know. You know, they're just off doing something. Well, just about that moment, one of the girls walks into camp, and she's got a trash bag filled with edible greens, just filled. There must have been enough in there to fill a supermarket. She sets it down and says, I brought a little something for dinner. A couple minutes after that, the other guy staggers in. His pants are torn. He's got scratches on his hands and on his face. And he says, I caught dinner, look! And he holds it up. It's a 3-inch lizard. Man, hold me back. There's a lot of food on that puppy. Well, I thought to myself, you know, she's got enough food there for a week, and he's got enough food there for, well, I don't know, but it'd be pretty small. And then there was this noise, crunch, crack, crunch, crack, and I looked up the side of the hill, and here comes a tree rolling down the hill, and it stops about 10 feet from camp and breaks into a million pieces when it hits the rocks. A few seconds after that, this girl walks down, and she goes, is that enough wood? Well, you see, that's something that happens sometimes out on survival trips. People put a lot of energy into the romance of survival living. They break up the wood and carry it up to camp. Well, the smart thing to do is to walk up the hill and push it into camp. Don't go hunting. Gather edible greens. Those are energy-saving things, and the energy that you save by doing those little things might be the energy that keeps you alive through the night. We hope you enjoyed Volume 2 of the Woodsmaster series, and we're looking forward to seeing you again in Volume 3. Meanwhile, we'll see you on the trail. Where's your boy? What's a good boy? Where's he? That's, was it Barfo and Feces? No.
Ah,